All right, we're going to continue on talking about Solomon a little bit. I was on safety last week, so I didn't really get to hear a lot of Brother Roy's teaching, so we won't try to back up on any of that and tie anything together or kind of step on what he did, but we know that Solomon has built the temple. We know the Lord has appeared to him and asked him what he had desired, and he desired wisdom, which was very pleasing to the Lord, that he asked for wisdom. And we see that he blessed him with other things as well, with great wealth, with the knowledge he asked for, the wisdom. And he was a very powerful man and a very popular man, if you will, going forward there in his reign. So like I say, we know that the temple has been built, and he's prayed to dedicate this to the Lord and asked the Lord to come into it and be a part of it and have his heart and his eyes upon it. And we see here as we start in 1 Kings chapter 9 is where we'll start out at. So I'll give you guys time to get there if you haven't already, but that's 1 Kings chapter 9. There's a lot in this, and we won't be able to unpack it all, I don't think, this morning, but it kind of goes up through verse 40 of chapter 11. I know in y'all's books it breaks it down a little bit less. We'll just try to touch on the verses that it was broke down for you guys as well, and maybe try to add some other things to it. Open up some other avenues there as well, maybe to see what's going on here. And I'm going to start out, we'll probably read first 3 or 4 or 5 verses there, then we'll expand upon those a little bit if we can, and then kind of move forward some and kind of get a picture of what's going on here. Maybe up through verse 8 we'll read from chapter 9. And verse 1 says, "And it came to pass when Solomon had finished the building of the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all Solomon's desire, which he was pleased to do, that the Lord appeared to Solomon the second time, as he appeared unto him at Gibeon. And the Lord said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, and put my name there forever, and mine eyes and mine heart shall be there perpetually." You know, Solomon's he's had a great thing happen to him here. The Lord's not appeared to him once, but twice. And we see that in other men in the Bible, how God's appeared to him. And we know how he feels towards these men. And we see that that the Lord has a great love for Solomon. He's granted him what he asked for. And he told him here, I heard your prayer. I heard you dedicating this building to me, and I will be there perpetually. I'll have my eyes and my heart in this temple. Verse 4 says, "And if thou wilt walk before me as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and will keep my statutes and my judgments." So he's telling him, as long as you keep your heart towards me and you serve me, then I'm going to bless you and do as you have asked me to do. But then he gives him a little warning here as we go forward of what may happen if he don't. And 5 says, "And I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David thy father, saying, there shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel." So he's telling him, we're going to keep your lineage going. He promised David that he would have an offspring that always would rule Israel. And that's what he's telling Solomon here. As long as we do what we're supposed to do, God will be in it. "But if ye shall at all turn from following me, ye or your children, and will not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them, and this house, which I have hallowed for my name, which will I cast out of my sight, and Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. And at this house which is high, every one that passeth by it shall be astonished, and shall hiss, and shall say, why hath the Lord done this unto this land and to this house?" So he's letting him know, you've built a great building here, you've built a great temple. I'm in it. I'll always be in it as long as you have your heart turned to me, as long as you're serving me and doing what I would have you to do. But he gives him this warning here, if you turn away from me, Israel will be a proverb, it will be a byword. And we'll see as we go forward here, Israel was made into a great nation under Solomon. It's one of the most powerful nations, or the most powerful nation on earth at that time. But God's telling him within an instant, I will turn it to a proverb. It'll just be a story of what? It'll be a story of what was. It'll be a byword. It'll be no importance to anyone. And they'll walk by this house and look at it and think, wow, how disgusting, how bad does this look? What has God done here? And he lets him know and they'll know that it's because that you have turned against me. It's because the people have turned against me God has dealt with them all the way through time with them turning to idols and things, even after he brought them out of Egypt and showed him his grace and his love and how he could take care of them and get them through these situations, fed them the whole time in the wilderness, all these things. Even after they were established, they would start getting back into the idols, and he would have a country come in. They'd take them and, they'd be enslaved for a while. They would get their senses back. They'd start praying back to the Lord and get back where they need to be, and he would bring them back out of the wilderness, so to speak. But he tells them here, this is what will happen if you do these things. And we see that Solomon, he was blessed unmightily. I mean, it was unbelievable how he was blessed here of the Lord with his wisdom, with the gold and the things that he was able to come about, with his riches. Israel at that time, like we're getting ready to say there, was the most powerful nation on earth. And you look at Israel on the map, and I was going to try to get something on a flash drive so Keith could put it up here, but when you look at Israel on the map, it's about the size of New Jersey. And you look at all these other countries that are around it over there, and they're a lot bigger. They should be more mighty as far as the amount of people, the amount of land, and things like that. But when you take Israel, as small as it was the most powerful country in the world. And that's just God right there. That's only that our God can do that, to make something so small in sight, so mighty and so powerful. Jerusalem was the most magnificent city in the world at that time. Solomon had built it up. He had built, the temple. He had built these other buildings, his palace. All these things there were just in grandeur. They were unbelievable to see. With the amount of gold and all the precious stones and the things that were used, the cedar trees, all these things that were brought into him that were used in his buildings. And you think of just that one city being the most powerful. And the temple was the most magnificent or most outstanding building in the world at that point in time. And I thought about that as well, and it should have been. It's God's house, right? God's house should always be the most outstanding building in its area. Limestone Free Will Baptist ought to be the most outstanding building in this area. Now, I'm not talking about physical presence. I'm not talking about the new addition going on there. I'm talking about spirituality when it comes to the Lord in that manner. This should be the most outstanding building from here to the next church, and then from that church to the next church. All these church buildings should be so full of the Spirit of the Lord that they stand out, that they shine, that people want to come to them, that people want to see them, just like they were wanting to see this temple. Now, the temple and some of these buildings, they were wanting to see them, like I said, for the physical aspect, for the beauty of them. Maybe they didn't understand what they were really looking at when they came from these foreign lands as far as the Spirit of the Lord and things like that. And that's something that Solomon could have done at that time too, is kind of pointed more people to the Lord, I believe, and whatnot. Not saying that he didn't, but those things could have been used in conjunction with what God had done for him. So as church members, as folks that are here on a regular basis, those of us that say we're saved and going on to heaven with the Lord, let's try to make our churches more spiritual. Let's try to make them a standing out part of our community. And I think Limestone does a great job. I think there's lots of outreach here. There's lots of things that you guys do that reach out to this community and do things, just like with this retreat yesterday. All the folks who put that on and were able to stay over for 12, 13 hours, however long, and all the planning that went into it by Miss Judy and all the others who had a hand in that, that is a great outreach. That is something that, that the Lord is pleased by. I'm sure he was pleased by the folks yesterday and all that went down. So, and it just brought that to my mind that we should always strive, and like I said, not out of good-looking buildings, not out of dressing super nice, not out of showing any kind of materials at all, but out of spirituality. All these churches should be shining and welcoming to people. We know so many churches out there sometimes aren't quite as welcoming as maybe they ought to be to folks as they come in and try to find something. But as we go forward here, we see that Solomon had, he had established trade routes. He had really set this kingdom up off of commerce, taxes, tariffs, things of that nature. We didn't hear a lot about tariffs till our current president came in, but Solomon was using them way back then. Folks that was traveling his trade routes, they were having to pay tolls. They were having to pay tariffs for things that were coming in, and he built his wealth. He was a very, very smart man. All the gold that was brought into him was just unbelievable. It tells us here in the Bible at one point, and I couldn't really ever nail it down, was it an every year thing or just in a year? So we're not going to try to put out what we don't know. But in 1 year, he had 666 talents of gold brought into his kingdom. And when you look at the talents, 1 talent is 75 pounds. So when you take and multiply that, 666 talents of gold at 75 pounds per talent equals out to be 49,950 pounds of gold. And in today's gold is worth about $49,572 a pound, or around $3,400 an ounce. It fluctuates and goes up and down on a daily basis, basically. So in 66 talents of gold, or 666 talents of gold in 1 year, equaled out in today's money to be about $2,476,121,400. So this man was dealing with some serious money. And this is not the only, he was bringing money in other routes. He had, and we'll get into this more, but he had a Navy out there doing things, bringing gold back in, exotic animals, things of this nature. So he was dealing with some very serious money. Now, some accounts, they say he could have been a trillionaire in today's world. And we see that the richest man has 300 or 400 some odd $billion. So even to Solomon's, comparing him to Solomon and what he may be today, it's no comparison, even though that's just a great amount of wealth that would, just boggle your mind. He had all kinds of folks wanting to come in and see him and hear him talk and see these things like we were saying. And folks were bringing him, it was custom back then, if you had another leader, a king, or anybody come from another country, and to see these top leaders of countries, they would bring a bounty. They would bring an offering, so to speak. And then, of course, that kingdom that they came to visit would give them one back. So Solomon had a lot of things going on here. Now, he had the king of Tyre, Hiram. He kind of partnered up with him, and Hiram had brought him some things there, and it tells us here. Let me see if we can find it in the scripture here. I'm going to start in verse 11 there, Keith, if you can pull that up for him. And it says in verse 11 of chapter 9, Now Hiram the king of Tyre had furnished Solomon with cedar trees and fir trees and with gold according to all his desire. And then King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. So even the cedar trees over there, I think sometimes over here out in the woods, we might take a cedar tree for granted, but we know it's beautiful wood. We know it has a nice smell. But it was a good commodity over here. Hiram had blessed him by bringing him those trees. He was using those in the building of things and whatnot. And he also brought gold to him and brought all these things to Solomon. And Solomon tried to repay him by giving him some cities there in Galilee. But when Hiram came and saw those cities, they didn't please him. It says Hiram and 12 came out of Tyre to see the cities which Solomon had given him, and they pleased him not. And he said, What cities are these which thou hast given me, my brother? And he called them the land of Kabul unto this day, which Kabul really is going to mean unpleasing, not pleasing. He wasn't very happy with these cities. So in some of the commentaries, they tried to point it out. Did Solomon give him something that wasn't worth as much to maybe whatever, or was Hiram just hard to please? And they kind of say, well, maybe neither. Tyre was those folks had made a lot of money off of navigation. Off of their commerce and things. And they, from some of the commentaries I'd read and whatnot, they were used to a very clean city. They were used to clean streets. They had nice houses. Those folks were fairly well off in that country because of the things they done. And maybe when he come down and saw these cities in Galilee that were more fit for agriculture, more fit for growing the corn and pastures and things, didn't maybe really know what to do with them. Didn't really have a desire to do anything with them because they're kind of out of his realm. It's nothing that he understood in a sense of how to maybe go in and utilize those cities to their full potential. So I think he got with Solomon there and maybe gave him those cities back, and they formed a partnership of trade, and they formed a partnership of their navies. Solomon built a navy that controlled the Red Sea area and all those areas out through there, Tarshish. Basically just kind of controlled, and him and Hiram, they controlled the seas at that point with their navies. It tells us here that the Navy of Tarshish would come back every 3 years. And when they would come back in, they would bring gold. They would bring stones, precious stones. It says apes and peacocks. It kind of made me laugh. We had a peacock here. We didn't know how valuable that thing was, right? That they're bringing all these things back to Solomon every couple years. So he had all kinds of commerce going on that's probably not even recorded, and all kinds of money coming in. And as we see that everyone that came and visited him, they was just bringing him all this precious stuff and wanting to come in and see him. We had the Queen of Sheba come to see Solomon. She came for over 1,000 miles. And when you think of that, in those days, 1,000 miles is a long journey for us now in a car. So when you have a person coming, some say up to 1,400 miles because it's kind of down, not Somalia, I'll get it in a minute. But anyway, it's down towards the coast there where she was the queen of Sheba down there. It's not in the modern day maps. Yemen maybe I think is where it's at, down in Yemen, down in that area. So she traveled all this way with the camels and all these things that she was packing them in. I mean, you can imagine in the Old West here when the country was settled, how they brought stuff in and how we've learned in history and things. So she brought in, I think, 120 talents of gold to him. precious stones and more spices that had ever been brought as a bounty to that land. So she came bearing lots of great goods and lots of things to Solomon, really to see if what she had been told was true. She wanted to hear him speak. She heard of his wisdom. She heard of how he had all these great things in his city. She heard of how his temple was most magnificent. And as she comes in and sits with him, we'll go to chapter 10, verse 1 through 8 right there and see if we can get a little better idea of that and a little more clarity of it. Chapter 10 and verse 1 says, "And when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to prove him with hard questions. And she came to Jerusalem with a very great train with camels that bare spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her of all her questions, that there was not anything hid from the king, which he told her not. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all of Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up into the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her." I think her questions got answered. I think she saw everything she was needing to see there, is what it's telling us. And she said to the king, "It was a true report that I heard in mine own land, and thy acts of thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes have seen it. And behold, the half was not told to me. Thy wisdom and thy prosperity exceedeth the fame which I heard. Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee and hear thy wisdom." So, and I thought when I read that, that's a little odd as well. Sometimes when a story like that's put out, or when you hear of something in a far land, or you hear of something even today, most of the time it's more exaggerated than what it is. And I think that's what she was thinking it was probably going on here, so I've got to go see this and see if it's even near what they're telling me. But as she sat there and listened to Solomon, and listened to the wisdom that only the Lord God could give him, that he had at that time in that manner, and saw all the things, and saw the happiness of his servants, saw just how everything was flowing in one accord, how everyone looked, all the utensils and things we'll get into here in a minute. All the stuff that she was seeing here, and she was satisfied with what she had heard, and she told him, "They didn't even tell me half of what was going on here. This is twice as much as what I was looking to see when I came here." So, and that's another thing as well. It kind of popped in my mind as I was going, when we talked about the spirituality of a church and the welcoming of a church. Limestone is known for being a welcoming church. I've had folks tell me before that don't go here, that say, "Hey, where you go to church at?" And I tell them, "Well, I've always heard that's a very friendly church." They go to church somewhere else, but they've heard that through other accounts. And I think Limestone's kind of like that in a sense. I was thinking, this church is known to be a nice, loving church, but I think sometimes you guys exceed that. I know when we came here, we felt so welcome and loved that it was just unbelievable that you could feel that in a church. After going to some other churches and kind of trying to find our place, and seeing how maybe the attitude, if you will, without lack of a better word, or with lack of a better word, is in places. So I'm not saying pat yourself on the back and stop doing it, but keep doing what you're doing and exceed what you're doing, right? And be one of those places that only the half was told of in a good manner. Let these folks come in and say, "Wow, this place is even more friendly, more loving, and more of a family than I ever thought it was." I've been to several churches over time. I'm 53 years old, and, you like to get yourself planted in a church and stay there. And we have at times, or I have in my life, but at times you've been to other places, and it's not very long before you see cliques that have formed. It's not very long before you see some backbiting that has went on. It's not very long before you see congregations that really don't get along with everybody in it. That's one thing I can say in my 4 years here. I haven't sat and searched everybody out and tried to look for it, but you don't see it at Limestone. You see here at Limestone a bunch of people who love each other, who are ready to go out and help, and who are ready to come out and go forward with whatever needs to be done. You see a lot of brotherly love here. Your pastor goes out and does his job exceedingly. He goes out and visits. He does his things that he's supposed to do. He's not just sitting back and taking in the benefits of what a pastor would take in, which some pastors tell you, "Hey, is there real benefits in it," right? Because the things that they do have to go through. And I'm not speaking for Brother Tim, but we know that he is a busy man in the church, and we can look out here now and see lots of busy folks in the church. There's plenty of them downstairs in classes. we have a lot of people here who go above and beyond and do what they do. And I tell people all the time when I'm out on jobs and things when church comes up that this is just a loving church family. And sometimes it's hard for them to connect with that, right? Like, you mean the whole church loves each other, really? Like, yeah, they do. So let's continue doing that. And like I said, let's make this place, as you all have already done. You're already doing it. But as we're told in the scriptures, as Paul told them, I think in Thessalonians at one time, whatever you're doing, do that and exceed in it even more, because there's more room for you to do it in, right? But I will say this is a very loving church. We're happy to be here, and I think God is pleased with it as well. Can we all do better with something? I know I can. So it's something we'd have to search out ourselves. I'm not going to stand up here and say who needs to do what. But getting back on the story here a little bit on how God has blessed Solomon. I mean, this man, his throne was so elaborate that there was no other kingdom in the world at that time had a throne even like his. We'll pick up on that. Let's read about it here just a little bit. Well, maybe I didn't write those verses down, but we'll get right here to it in just a second where it explains it. I believe it's in 10 as well. Here it is. Chapter 10 and verse 18, it says, "Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with the best gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind. And there were stays on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays." So he had some armrests, per se, on the sides of it. It had some lions there, and 12 lions stood there on one side, on the other, and on the other upon the 6 steps. And there was not like any made in any kingdom. So you had 12 lions as you come up, 6 on each side, 1 on each side of the steps, 6 steps. You had the lions up beside the armrest. We know that ivory over time has been a very valuable commodity to folks that are out, doing these things in Africa, killing the elephants, whatever. We won't get into that. We know that was a very valuable commodity as well. And then overlaid with all this gold, he has made a spectacle here, right? He has made something that's not been seen anywhere. And all this is due to what? The Lord giving him the wisdom, and then blessing him with the riches, and blessing him with all these other things. So it's all due to God. And we see that, it's just like us, our breath, right? It all comes from God. It doesn't matter what kind of job we have. It doesn't matter if we're driving the nicest car. It doesn't matter if our car may need some work next week to get us going where we're going again. God has blessed us with those things. I truly believe if you turn your life over to the Lord and you have that faith in him and you give him all that he's asking you to give him, he will supply those needs. Now, it may not be our wants. It may not be the biggest house on the block. It may not be the newest car if that's our wants. But he will supply what you need. And I think if we're happy with that and we go along with it and know that, hey, this is what God wants me to have. This is how he wants me to live, and I'm happy to be that way, right? That's what the Lord wants from us. Some folks are blessed more than others. We can look out in society and see folks who don't go to church and things that have got a lot of stuff. We know that's temporary. We know they're not taking that with them. And we'll see here in a minute that Solomon, he kind of had a fall on the backside of this. With all the great things that's done for him and all the great things that the Lord has bestowed him with, he still kind of had a mess up there. He still, as we'll find out, didn't, live continually in doing the things that God had told him to do. He didn't heed that warning seriously. And maybe sometimes things come to people too easy. Maybe it comes too fast here in our human world. We see that this reign, you would think when you see this that, wow, this guy was in power for, just in reading it with all the things that they've done, with all the buildings that they built. He built cities upon cities upon cities. He built cities for his chariots. He had 1,400 chariots. What a mighty army he had built up. They were looked at as, hey, we're not messing with these people, right? But it's all because of God. He had 12,000 horsemen and had cities for those. He had something specific for everything. But only a reign of about 40 years. 40 years seems like a lot, but it's really not. There's a lot of us in this room that are over 40 years old. And those that are not, you'll be there soon, and time flies, right? Like they told us when we were young, it even goes faster than that. So 40 years, you'd think a lot of the time of his reign was in building and doing things. But he built up such a place that was unbelievable. They're telling us here his drinkware, his silverware, the stuff they ate, it was all pure gold. This man, it was unbelievable the things that he was doing. They made silver in that land really irrelevant at that time. Silver was as common as stones laying on the ground over there. It meant nothing. Silver still today hasn't got the highest price point, but we know it looks nice. We know if you have pure silver, if you had pure silver silverware and pure silver drinking cups in your house, you're going to think, wow, these are pretty cool, right? Or they look nice, whatever your intention is for materialism. But over there, silver was just an afterthought. He had such things, the exotic trees that were brought into this country by these other kings and given to him to use. And like I said, the cedar, the almonds, the things that were just of, the nature of royalty that was brought in and given to him, but all through God, right? It was still through the Lord. And we see that as we go on here, he is entertaining these folks. He had the Queen of Sheba there. He starts, here in a minute, we'll see where he starts kind of marrying off into these wives. And some folks think, well, was it a political thing? Was it something to keep the borders of Israel secure? Was it him just being lustful? I'm sure I'm going to miss over a bunch of stuff I want to pull out here. Let me look at these notes real quick. And I do talk a little fast, so I apologize for that. But and also, it tells us that his forces controlled the trade route south of Israel through Edom. And Edom, and I'm sure most of y'all know that, is from Esau. When you had Jacob and Esau, Esau was the father of the Edomites. So you had their trade route stretched south through Edom, all the way down into Arabia and India and back over to Africa. So you think of the amount of land that this man was controlling that was outside of his kingdom, that the folks dared not to infringe upon. They dared not to pay their tolls, their tariffs and things like that they were being charged. And that was another thing I failed to do, is get the mileage of that. But that's quite a few miles of trade route that a man is controlling from a small little country of Israel, and having to keep his finger on it at all times, right? And making sure that he's getting his due, if you will, from those folks that are traveling these places and doing these things. Because not only did he control those trade routes, if you wanted to bring something up through it, you're going to pay that toll, just like going on some of these turnpikes in America or some of these toll roads that are out there. They're going to make you pay to go from point A to point B to help keep that road up and all those things. So Solomon was charging for those things as well. So it's really untelling how much money this man was really bringing in and how the Lord had blessed him with those things. We see here as well, Solomon started out just like a lot of Christians do, in our early walks with the Lord, when we're being blessed and we're feeling good about what's going on and we've been delivered from the things, whether it's addiction, whether it's our filthy mouths, whether it's just we've been, delivered from Satan's hands and we're a good person and we don't do these other things. We don't go out and drinking, and we haven't been on drugs, and we don't have a filthy mouth, but we're still not saved. When as we first get in with the Lord and we first get in his family and he takes care of us, Solomon started out with a trusting, obedient heart. I don't think it was his intention, when this thing first got started, to end up the way he did. But as we get power and as we get fame and we start seeing things through other eyes, and the world's, Solomon, in a sense, I wrote down, he had the world by the tail, if you will, in some of today's, saying here. He had anything he wanted at any time, really probably with the snap of a finger, right? But what did that get him in the end? He went from one of the most wise man in the world to really a foolish man in the end, before it was all said and done, as he turned away from the Lord. But I believe, like I said, at first he had a trusting, obedient heart, but when he turned that heart away to those wives and the false idols, that's when things changed in his life, and that's when things changed for Israel again. So I think as us as Christian believers, as we go through our walk with the Lord, let's not forget how we got there at first. Let's not get into a mundane kind of walk and a routine with God. I think it's important, as a lot of you folks do, is to be involved in the church, to be involved in the ministry in some part, to be involved in the work of the church. It keeps you going, right? You're not just in a routine. I'm in church Sunday morning. Sometimes I come Sunday night. I'll go Wednesday every now and then. Even if you're here for all three services, is it a routine because, I feel like I need to be there, or is it something you want to do? And I think as we branch out and we do more things for the Lord, it keeps our mind busy. It keeps us seeing more things with the Lord and seeing how he does bless us and how he does work through us and how he helps us along with these things. So I don't believe Solomon started out, and we know that because the Lord wouldn't have been working through him like that, but God knows all things, right? He knew how Solomon was going to end up. But this is just another cautionary tale for us as believers, as there are a lot of these in the Bible. But one thing we'll see here too before we wrap up is he had a love for David still. The Lord loved David, and we know that David had a lot of missteps. But the Lord still had a love for David, and we'll get into that here in a second, and his lineage. And we see that, on down through that lineage that Jesus finally came as the Messiah and the King to complete that. I'm not sure they really had a king from David on out that was really a true to the Lord the whole time he was reigning, right? Somebody had a misstep along the way until Jesus came on the scene, and we know he's the perfect king. We know that he never sinned. We know that he carried that lineage on out from where it's at. And as all you church folks know, you can trace, Jesus' lineage all the way back to David, to Jesse, and see that where he's part of that family. And God, fulfilled what he said he was going to in a true manner. We'll move forward there just a little bit and talk about Solomon. He had a fancy for these women. And I'm not going to sit here and say it was anything of the women. It was Solomon, right? There's men and women all in this room right here. A man can just as easily look to another woman other than his wife, as well as a woman can look to another man that's not her husband. So we're not going to sit here and say, oh, it's women being evil, enticing him, or vice versa. We're human, and we see that that's what went on with him here. Were the conservative women of Israel too boring for him? Was it a situation of that? Was all these other women that were serving pagan gods and things, were they more up his alley because they were a little looser, they were a little more fun to be around, they were a little more this and that? Was it political reasons that he married these ladies to keep the borders a little more secure? Because I'm married to this king's daughter and this captain's daughter and all these things. This man had 700 wives, had 300 concubines. I dare say if any of us in here had 1,000 friends that were supposed to be true friends, how could you ever have a relationship with them all in a correct manner as far as just establishing conversation? I'm talking friends other than husband or wife here. So he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and that was his downfall. We see, and what I was wanting to compare to with his father there, and why God still had a love for David. David had some horrible mistakes in the Bible. David did some things that we would think, wow, and that man was still allowed to come into heaven afterwards. But we know that God will allow you to repent for your misgivings. We know that the Lord will allow you to repent and come back in his family after you have sinned. David's heart was always after the Lord. David was a man after God's own heart, right? So David had a heart for God. He made some mistakes, and he did some things that were wrong, there's no doubt. But he always repented of it, and he always poured his heart out to the Lord, and he always got back in where he needed to be. Solomon did something different. He turned his heart away from God. And I think when we turn our heart away from God, what's the most important organ in our body besides living and besides it pumping your blood and whatnot? The Lord comes into your heart. He doesn't come into our minds. Our minds are secondary to the heart. Our true treasures and our true thoughts and our true loves come from the heart. And that's where God lives when he comes into our body. That's where the Holy Spirit comes into and stays. If you're a Christian believer, you believe that. When you're saved, that's where the Holy Spirit comes into, is right here. So when you turn your heart from God and you turn him away, what is that telling God? That's telling God, I don't want you in my life. I don't want you in here. You're evicting the Lord, if you will, for lack of a better term, out of your life. You're kicking him out of your heart. You're trying to get rid of him. You're wanting to do something different. And why would we do that? Do we think that, and what are we telling God when we do that? That we don't need him? We can do it on our own? We have a better plan for our life than he does? Solomon had it all, like we were saying, but just letting the world get to him, whether it was of the women, whether he was going to let his riches, get to him and turn him into a different person, his heart turned from God, and that was the problem. That's why Israel became a byword at that time. That's why Israel became a proverb to all those people. Now they can tell the story of what was. Man, remember when Israel was the most powerful? Remember when Jerusalem was this and that? Remember how grand that temple was? That's what happened here. And God even told him, and this is the loving God that we have, because I don't know that any of us in this room would be this way if someone crossed us the way that Solomon had just crossed the Lord and went against him. He even told him, I won't take this kingdom out of your hands during your life, just because of the sake of your father David. Still showing that love that he had for David, because he knew that David sought after his heart. So Solomon's son Rehoboam was going to take over at some point, but when he did, And we won't try to get into all that. We're going to run short on time. But when he did, the kingdom was separated. Jeroboam, some of these words, Jeroboam had taken over the northern part of Israel. He was actually a hand in Solomon's court there. He turned against Solomon, let's say that, out of his own people. So he was ruling the north after this was all said and done. But God still left Judah for Solomon's offspring to control. And so he still left a man of David's lineage in control of that part, but he didn't give him the whole kingdom. He took part of that away from him because of the sin of his father. And we know that David wasn't allowed to build the temple. He wanted to build this grand place for the Lord, but the Lord told him, no, your son Solomon will do that. David had done some things, and maybe it wouldn't have been pure enough, or however we want to get into that. But so we see that he still gave some concession to Solomon and didn't just take it right out at that time. We see that he had some enemies rise up against him. I want to get the names right, but I may take too long hunting it back down here because I didn't write that down, I don't believe. But you had some folks that God was starting to stir up against the kingdom. You had some folks that he was stirring up. You had, here we go, in chapter 11 and verse 14, God had stirred the adversary into Solomon, Hadad, the Edomite. He was